good?
We had the best.
Ellen, we're good?
Best.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Weathersfield Board of Education. Tonight is Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021, and we are meeting in the Town Hall chambers. Ellen, may we have roll call, please?
Yes, Chairman Carey. Good evening, everyone. Mr. Cassio?
Good evening, Ellen. I'm here.
Thank you. Mrs. Evans? Mrs. Granato?
Present.
Mr. Lesser?
Here.
Mr. Michaels?
Here.
Mrs. Paradise?
Present.
Mr. Viley?
Here.
Vice Chairman, Mr. Healy?
Here.
Chairman, Mr. Carey.
Present.
All present.
Thank you. If we could stand, we'll have Mr. Riley lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There is no student and staff recognition. We're moving on to the approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the June 8th, 2021 regularly scheduled meeting?
So moved.
Second. Thank you. With any discussion? Seeing none, with a motion and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Public comment. Anyone from the public wishing to make comment? Public comments closed. Communication, Mr. Emmett.
Thank you, Mr. Carey. Good evening, everyone. I wanted to just say again, congratulations to the class of 2021. The feedback from our graduation ceremony on June 11th was overwhelmingly positive. It was certainly a nice opportunity to return back to the Cove, and the weather was ideal for the ceremony. We offered up the use of the high school this year for Safe Grad, as it allowed for greater spacing and ventilation. Feedback from this event was positive, although we did have to move some of the games within the building so as to not damage ceiling tiles. The senior class wrapped up their high school careers with the senior prom on Saturday evening. Again, the response that I heard from both students and parents alike was that it was a great event that allowed them to be normal again. So very happy to be able to offer that up. The junior class had their prom experience at Quasi on Monday, June 14th, so we certainly didn't leave our juniors out. Again, feedback received there was that it was an appreciated event, and they liked having the opportunity to be together. At the middle and elementary schools, we had students in grades 6 and 8 go through the drive-through ceremony, and again, we had fewer vaccinated of this group, so we kept it on the safe side. I certainly expect that next year we will be able to regain those traditions there as well. So needless to say, I did attend the Hammer step-up ceremony. Very, very well attended, and the teachers and the principal did a wonderful job of making sure that all of our students were appropriately recognized. So want to give everybody the update with regard to our student rep for the Board of Education. As you know, Tiago is headed off to Virginia Tech after serving as a student board rep. Weathersfield High School has held an election for the next student rep, and I am very pleased to report that Lena Usello has been selected to serve as the next student representative to the Board of Education. Lena is the class of 2022 secretary. She's an active member of the Weathersfield High School community, and many of you may know her from her work as an anchor on Blue Eagle News. Congratulations to Lena, and we look forward to her joining the board at the August 24th Board of Ed meeting. This evening, we bring before you the 2021-2022 budget allocation for your approval. This year's budget savings offered the flexibility to offset next year's insurance increase, and the shift from Anthem to Cigna for health insurance has also helped to save $150,000. The remaining reductions were taken outside of programs and staffing. With the budget now settled, we're moving forward with the hiring process for our support positions utilizing the ESSER II funding. There are a lot of moving parts at this particular time. However, we expect we'll begin the year with additional resources in schools that will support our students' learning and social emotional well-being. Just to let the public know, the Social Justice Coalition met last Thursday. Our subgroups are now honing in on specific areas of focus. Those include policing, education, and community engagement. The coalition will meet again on Thursday, July 22nd. And I just want to make sure everybody is aware that the district is currently engaged in bargaining with the nurses union as well as with the secretary and paras union. We do have meetings scheduled with both units over the course of the summer. So for those of you that are participating in those negotiating sessions, I thank you and look forward to coming up with deals with both of these bargaining units. And with that, that is communications.
Thank you, Mr. Emmett.
Thank you, sir.
Moving on to recommended motion, the approval of the revised 2021-2022 budget. Mr. Michaels, do you have a motion for us?
Sure, move that the Weathersfield Board of Education approve the revised operating budget for the 2021-2022 school year in the amount of $57,205,259.
Can you say that number again, Lou?
57,205,259.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Casio. Mr. Emmett, discussion?
Yes, we received word from town council about where the budget may end up coming in. And again, with town council reductions, we had a variety of reductions that council took, including a decrease in pension contribution per actuarial valuation. That was $47,179. The council also reduced the OPEB contribution by $78,000. They reduced the medical insurance premium cost from a 2% increase to a 0% increase. That was savings of $91,575. The medical insurance savings due to the change in provider from Anthem to Cigna will net, as I mentioned in communications, a total of $150,000 in savings. And the 2021 Board of Ed budget savings applied to 21-22 medical insurance budget is a total of $805,000. And in addition, council asked that we add into the budget an additional cost related to cyber insurance. That policy is $12,500. And that left us with looking for $73,205 in reductions. And we looked at these three areas as a means of reducing that budget. $32,500, it's a reduction in outplacement tuition for a student that is returning to district. $15,000 in anticipated savings related to district-wide legal costs, and $25,705 in projected retirement and new hire savings. That is one retirement at Silas Dean, and that is the administrator at High Crest coming in at a lower salary scale than what was budgeted.
Any board members with questions or comments? All right, seeing none, with a motion and a second, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Mr. Emmett, update on the long-term range facilities plan.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Carey. This evening, we have representatives here from Colliers and Malone McBroom, I know now operating under a different name, so if I can have you guys come up to the podium, we've got a presentation.
Don't fall asleep. And you've seen this. Are you okay?
Right. Good evening, everybody. Pat Gallagher with SLR Consulting. You may know us formerly as Mylana McBroom, and just wanted to start off tonight by giving a little bit of a background of our long-range planning process, which began back in 2018. So that started with an enrollment projection report that we presented to the board in the fall of 2018, looking deeply at overall enrollment trends as well as demographic and housing. And what we found is that historically you're a very stable community. Your enrollment has not fluctuated as much as many of your other suburban districts in Greater Hartford. And we're expecting a slight uptick in enrollment through the late 2020s, reaching just under 2,000 elementary students by the late 2020s. This is a number that will update in the fall. Many districts have seen some pretty big shifts in enrollment this year due to COVID, and so this will be updated with the fall of 2021 data to support this process going forward. Another piece of our work was to look at your existing school sites and understand the pros and cons of each and their ability to support either a new or a renovated school. including all of the supporting areas such as parent pickup and drop-off, buses, playfields, and playgrounds. And so some of the key takeaways from that process were that the Charles Wright site is the least ideal of your existing school sites. It's your smallest school site. It also has a very narrow lot configuration, which makes traffic very challenging. You have a lot of driveways in close proximity to one another. And so especially during parent pickup and drop-off hours, a very challenging site from an access standpoint. Two of the other key findings were related to the Hanmer and Highcrest sites. So the Hanmer site, we looked at not just the existing Hanmer site, but also the adjacent Stillman School and Board of Ed property, which is largely the baseball field parking area for the Board of Ed, their offices, and the tennis courts. And that site, while small, is large enough to support a new school built off-site, and that would allow students to remain in Hanmer if a new school was built on that adjacent site. Similarly, Highcrest is your largest school site, and that site has an area on the northern end that is relatively flat, and that portion of the site can also support a new school, and that again would allow the existing Highcrest to remain occupied during construction and also serve as swing space. So as part of every long-range plan, it's really important to identify swing space, and what a swing space is a building that's temporarily used to house students during renovation projects. And Michael can maybe speak a little bit to your experience with the high school project and some of the challenges associated with that.
Yeah, one of the things we really wanted to look at here in doing the due diligence was looking at our experience with Weathersfield High School. Weathersfield High School was done in phases, and what we typically found was that phases never finished on time. We found a significant amount of hazardous material which needed to be abated and could only be abated at times when the students weren't in the building. We dealt with a lot of disruption to the educational process. So this plan is really looking at minimizing that and actually eliminating it. It also eliminates the need to have to bring in portables and have students spend 1.5 to 2 years in portable buildings moving between buildings.
Great, thanks for that, Michael. So as part of our due diligence efforts, we identified the Highcrest site as your ideal swing space. So if a new school were to be built on that northern portion of the Highcrest site, the old Highcrest can then serve as your swing space. So as your other buildings are renovated, students would move into the old Highcrest temporarily while their building is renovated. So now I'll just give a brief recap of some of the scenarios that were looked at over the last 2 years, starting with our scenario 1, which is largely a status quo and maintain. So back in 2018, as we did our enrollment projections work, the Colliers team did a facilities conditions assessment and laid out some of the costs associated with just maintaining your buildings in a state of good repair. And this is largely within your existing spaces with no improvements to the educational function. And as many of these buildings are reaching 50+ years old, that's obviously a consideration as part of the long-range planning process. And Chuck, I don't know if you wanted to speak a little bit to some of the costs associated with the status quo.
Yeah, thanks, Pat. Chuck Warrington with Colliers Project Leaders. Good to see everybody again. Yeah, so we did that facilities condition assessment as part of our phase 1 in this overall plan. And this is the culmination of phase 2. Our estimates for the next 10 years, again, to maintain your buildings was approximately $31 million. Keep in mind, that's $31 million to maintain, keep it dry, keep it heated, without any programmatic improvements for 21st century learning. It just, again, maintain as is. And your maintainers are doing a great job as it is. They're probably masking some of the issues that are in your buildings. They do a great job of keeping them up, but that's $31 million. And then at the end of 10 years, you're looking at another 31 probably plus $million after that moving forward.
Thanks, Chuck. So getting into some of our other scenarios. So scenario 2, we looked at modernizing all 5 buildings. This would maintain the current sizes of the buildings, but replace them with either new or renovated as new buildings. You'll notice there's these color codings on each of these scenarios, the blue representing renovate as new, and the greens representing new construction. And so all the next 3 scenarios that I'll present all include a mix of renovate as new and new construction project. So overall, this would maintain your current seat count, but spread across 5 schools, which ended up being the most expensive of the 3 scenarios that we looked at that included new construction or renovated as new. So the next option we looked at modernizing 4 schools, so moving from a 5 elementary school system down to 4, with the remaining 4 buildings being roughly equal in size. As a neighborhood-based school system, we tend to find that you have equal numbers of sections per grade in your building. So if you have 3 kindergarten classes, typically you'll have 3 5th grade classes, 3 6th grade classes. So when we're looking at sizing the buildings, we used our sections per grade model. So this would have all 4 of your buildings as a 3-section per grade school. Under this option, you would lose some overall capacity, going from 5 to 4. You would not replace all of the capacity lost with Charles Wright closing in the other buildings, and so you'd lose between 150 and 175 seats. And it would be very tight over the 10-year period, especially with that slow growth. And so while the projections, really only look at an 8 to 10-year window, you also want to be thinking in the back of your mind these buildings are going to live well beyond that, and thinking about future-proofing. And so we have some concerns that this scenario may have some risk associated with it from a capacity standpoint. Scenario 4 also moves from 5 to 4 with Charles Wright closed. And on this scenario, we have a larger high crest. So that's an area within Wethersfield that has seen some growth recently. There is some vacant land available, some of the last remaining vacant land within the town within that district. And so this scenario proposes a larger 4-section per grade school on the High Crest site. And again, that's your largest school site today, so that supports that larger school building. This would also give some flexibility at Hanmer, where the Stillman Board of Ed school site is fairly small, so it may be somewhat of a challenge to fit a larger building on that site. So it just gives you a little more flexibility in being between a 2 and 3-section per grade school site at that building. And then Webb and Emerson Williams as renovate as new projects, both at 3 sections per grade. So scenario 4, we wanted to present a little bit of a deeper dive, since out of the ones that we looked at from a technical standpoint, it scored the highest. And so as we move from 5 to 4, there will need to be a redrawing of the attendance lines within Wethersfield Public Schools. So this map is just a conceptual map showing a hypothetical what-if scenario. And if we wanted to hit those enrollment targets and section targets in each of the buildings, what could the districts look like? And if you move from 5 to 4, this wouldn't necessarily mean that only students in Charles Wright are impacted. There would need to be other moves in other areas of Wethersfield in order to balance enrollment across all of those schools. And so here we're splitting Charles Wright between Emerson Williams and Webb, and then sending portions of the existing Webb and Emerson Williams, the southern areas of those schools, down to the larger High Crest school. And we also develop enrollment projections for the scenarios, again, to ensure that we're not exceeding those enrollment targets at any of the buildings, and also allowing us to somewhat right-size the buildings as we go forward into the school construction grant process. So under scenario 4, Emerson Williams would be right on target at a 3-section per grade school with just under 470 K-6 students in the peak year. Hanmer would be a slightly smaller school, again, giving you a little bit more flexibility on that smaller site at just under 400 students. High Crest would be your largest building, approaching 4 sections per grade with an enrollment peak of about 650 K-6 students. And finally, Webb, again, also in that sweet spot for a 3-section per grade school at just under 470 students. And again, this will be updated when we do our enrollment projection refresh this fall to make sure that we're on track. Currently, you're trending about 40 students lower than we had projected 2 years ago. However, we think that that's largely due to COVID and some of the shifts that you've seen as a result of that. So the last thing I'll touch on before passing it to Chuck is our phasing. And thinking back to our swing space, we need to have that swing space open in order to support those renovate as new projects, which are called out in those blue boxes. And so in order for a renovate as new at Emerson Williams or Webb to move forward, the High Crest project would need to be completed first, therefore opening up the old High Crest as a swing space. So under scenario 4A, the new High Crest school would be built first. And in phase 2, the old Emerson Williams will be renovated as new, with those students swinging into the old High Crest, and then new Hanmer built on the adjacent Stillman School and Board of Ed site. And then finally, phase 3 with Webb as a renovate as new project, again with those students swinging into the old High Crest space to enable that to move forward. And an alternative phasing that we looked at has two projects up front, so your two new schools, Hanmer and Highcrest, being built in phase one. Again, these two projects can be built independent of one another, followed by phase two, a renovate as new at Emerson Williams, again with utilizing that swing space at the old Highcrest, and finally phase three at Webb, again swinging into the old Highcrest to facilitate that. And I'll pass it on to Chuck to talk about some of the costs associated with those two options.
Just before I get into the costs, maybe just to put a little context to the scenarios. So the 4A and the 4C are the recommended scenarios with the facility subcommittee. In 3 and 4, as you can tell, the only difference is a larger Highcrest instead of being equally sized. We did have three different, a 4A, a 4B, and a 4C. Again, the primary difference, the phasing, how we're going to propose to phase those. Again, that 4A was we call a 1-2-1. Potentially, I don't think we've worked out the number of referendums yet. That's to be determined. But it's in that sequence. And each of those phases are about a 3-year duration to go from referendum through design, bidding, and construction, ultimately to occupancy, just kind of give you a point of reference of how long those last. So these programs are approximately about 10 years if they're done sequentially in that way. 4B was, the only difference was a 1-1-1-1 consecutive, so that would string it out about 12 years. That's a long time to do this program, and I think the committee felt that would be too long to get that parity between all the schools. And then obviously the 4C is front loading the two new schools up front and getting those in advance. And there's a lot of discussion, I think, that's still going to have to be had as far as, you know, what's the most advantageous and the best solution. So kind of getting to the cost where we come into play with SLR at Colliers is we put together what we call high and low budgets for these. At Colliers, we specialize in establishing what we call total project budgets. And these budgets, you're seeing the high-level summary, but the budgets themselves include, you're going to hear terminologies, construction costs or hard costs. That's the actual building of the building. And a lot of times when we talk about construction costs, most folks are talking about the construction. But what they're not including are what we call the soft costs, and those include furnitures, fixtures, and equipment, what we call FF&E. That's basically if you take the building, you turn it upside down, it's everything that falls out, all your desks, your chairs, your filing cabinets, and other miscellaneous equipment, maintenance equipment, et cetera. Those soft costs also include fees and expenses. They're for architects' fees, designer fees, consultants. There's a lot of consultants on these projects under the architect's umbrella, but there's third-party code review, third-party structural review, materials testing labs, hopefully an owner's rep like ourselves to assist and guide you through the process. Legal fees, what are included in these, it's really important to note, are bonding and financing costs, because at this point we don't know what those are, so those would have to be added into these. Every district, the financing strategies are different, so we wait for the Department of Finance to give us those numbers, and we kind of plug those in to that. They also include escalation, so we include about 3 or 4 years of escalation. Certainly one of the big questions is material costs right now. We're watching that as we speak, so as we approach the referendum, we're going to reach out to our partners in the industry, our estimators, our contractors, to kind of see what's happening. We see bids come in, and we're going to watch that closely. Hopefully that we're hoping that levels out by this time next year, but we'll have to wait and see for that. And then the last thing it includes is owner's contingency for unforeseen conditions, primarily. That's roughly about between 5 and 10% of the project. Always got to have that. It might be for third-party building official, fire marshal requests. It could be for owner requests during the project. We might ask for betterments, and then potentially errors and omissions, which is if there's a mistake in the drawings, some of that pays for that. So these are total project budgets, not just construction, but they are comprehensive budgets. On the 4A, which is the 1-2-1, we had a high with an enrollment of Highcrest of 653. a range of roughly $47 to roughly $63 million. And again, those are escalated costs out a couple years from now. The probable is basically the midpoint at this moment. Now, keep in mind, we haven't developed educational specifications yet for these. That's probably one of the next steps that we'll go through. That basically determines all the programming, all the spaces that will be required, and we fine tune what the size of this building is. We estimate the size based upon the enrollments. There's a calculation, a space standard calc we won't get into tonight, but basically gives us an idea of what size it should be and how much the state's willing to reimburse. So we kind of go in the midpoint for the probable for the sake of estimating your reimbursement from the state and ultimately the estimated district share. So in that second to last column, you see estimated reimbursement. Each town is designated, is provided a percentage. It's predetermined by the state of Connecticut using what they call an angelic formula. And there's two different rates, one for new construction and one for renovation additions. If you've seen the bullets, second bullet down, the 2021 reimbursement rate for a new construction is 45.71%. And the renovation rate, they add another 10% on because you're reusing and incentivize, is 10% higher at 55.71%. So those are current rates. What goes into this reimbursement also, and this is real important to know because a lot of districts get mistaken with some of the costs, are what we call ineligible costs. Every project, regardless if it's new or renovation, has ineligible costs. Anything outside the property line is ineligible. So if we're tying in utilities into the road, that's ineligible. If there's a sidewalk that's outside that property line, even though it's on the, theoretically inside the curb, that's ineligible. Laptops, computers, if they're purchased. But that's in every case. Again, that's an important point to note. So we assume 5% ineligibles right off the top, just as an estimate. And there's a resulting net eligible cost, and that's what we apply these percentages to. We're also assuming that the entire building be 100% eligible, the space of the building, because if you overbuild, sometimes the state may say, well, we're going to reduce your reimbursement rate. We're assuming that's 100% reimbursed at this moment, and we're going to be talking with the state pretty soon to kind of get them up to speed on what we're thinking. For that, and then the resulting share is what the district share is, and that's what your Department of Finance is going to use to roll in and start looking at what the tax impact is, and I think they're looking at that as we speak. So for the total plan that we're talking about, the estimated reimbursements of $77.5 million, with the remaining balance about $84.8 million for the entire plan over the life of the plan for the town share. To get 4 new and updated buildings for that amount is I guess it's subject. I'm not a taxpayer, so it's probably not fair to me to say it's a fair deal, but I think it's pretty good. You're averaging about $20 million per school to either get new or renovate like new for that. The renovation costs, that is what we call renovate like new. Basically tear it down to the studs. It's all new finishes, new mechanical systems, new electrical, new IT. Everything's brand new in it, for a 20-year lifespan, according to the state.
Chuck, can you talk a little bit about the issue of hazmat? With our experience at Weathersfield High School, we came upon a lot of hazardous materials, and we'd be looking within these plans at doing 2 renovate as new, which would be both Webb and Emerson. How do you figure for any type of hazardous materials in those buildings?
Yeah, so based upon our past experience and talking with estimators, we include on a cost per square foot basis between $8 and $12 per square foot for hazardous materials abatement. As part of our due diligence, when we get to those projects, we would recommend in these early phases, it wouldn't happen for these now because they're 2 new ones, hiring a licensed environmental planner. SLR is one of those that can do it, and there's others in the state that can do it. And they would come in and they take a preliminary look at the building, looking for suspect materials. You guys are familiar with PCBs and asbestos, and basically we want to make sure we account for that and include that in the budget. What's I think great is about these plans, and you have the luxury in these plans, is to have that swing space that you and Pat talked about. Being able to take the children out of the school and put them in another school and not be disrupted We couldn't abate, as you said, except for summer and winter breaks, and that's not really conducive to that. But we do account for it in the budget and then refine it. So.
Chuck, I just want to, there's a lot of conversations going on with you and Pat right now, and I thought it would be a good time for a board just to bring some things to the table. Why are we doing this? That's the number one thing that the community needs to know. Our schools are in good shape, but they're behind. They're, as far as when I say in good shape, we do the best we can with what we have. You know, they're safe, but they're not in line with learning right now. And that's what we're trying to get it to the point where we need to be. There's a lot of things that, you know, we are looking to do, and we're trying to make this project a community project. And it's going to affect all schools, just not one. It's going to be all elementary. It's been working on this for quite a number of years. It's just not something that popped up, and it's been discussion. And it came back to the table with the board chair and the mayor of Wethersfield thought it would be a good opportunity for us to bring it back to the table. And that's why we're here again tonight. We've started from the beginning by discussing this, trying to be transparent and communicate this, and I hope there are people out there watching, because it's a big, big project for our children and for the community. When you hear $31 million out there, and renovate 2, build 2 new, it's a lot, but it's not going to happen tomorrow. You know, we're down the road. We're planning for the future. You hear a lot of stuff out there, conversation-wise. We're closing a school. Well, not tomorrow, maybe in 4 years, or when the projects are completed. But I just need to, you know, the board needs to be working on this, and we are working on it. But I think that, more importantly, we're just trying to keep current. We're working for long-term plans for the Wethersfield children and for our community. And I just think it's imperative that this project keep moving forward, and that we understand where we're going with it. And I think that we can see a lot of the plans. I think we're going to have to motivate, you know, a little bit more conversation with our families and the community in Wethersfield, because this has to be supported. So we got a lot to do. It's just not one and done. We're working very hard as a body to keep it going. So I just think that, you know, we can hear all the numbers, but there are a lot. And I think that what we're waiting for, and the numbers aren't here, is how this project will affect the taxpayers in Wethersfield, each homeowner. And so we haven't gotten those numbers yet from the town. And that's the key push. So it sounds like a lot of money, but when you break it down per household and what they're going to be paying, it's, you know, hopefully it will happen. We're watching it. You know, we're not wild and crazy spending. We're doing what's right for the community. And so I don't know if anyone else would like to comment that's been on the committee. I know Bobby and I have been on it since day one.
Yeah, Ms. Granado.
I'd just like to say, as a teacher in town for 40 years, and 30 of those years were at Charles Wright, so as we talk about closing Charles Wright, my heart does a little flutter. But we're trying to bring Wethersfield with these elementary schools into the 21st century of learning. And these schools are being band-aided. That's what's going on right now. They're running, they're safe, but these are not learning facilities. And the innovation and the technology that our young people are exposed to, they also need an environment that is conducive to this kind of learning. So I'm 100% behind this, and I am very sad to see the Charles Wright community not part of this, but I also see the Charles Wright community going out and showing what they are and who they are to where their new place is to learn. So I'm 100% behind this. I hope the community is 100% behind this because this is a necessity. So I thank you for your support early. Thank you.
Bobby, with regards to the Charles Wright, and maybe Chuck can fill us in on, when you go to a building, the state looks at it and says, not really, it's landlocked, it doesn't look like we can perform well in this school, and we're putting good money into a location that may not be the best worth or cost to it. Chuck, can you help us with that as far as what the state basically would indicate about Charles Wright School?
Yeah, sure. Based upon our experience with the state, the parcel, at first glance, the state has state guidelines that they recommend for the minimum size parcel. If you were to go look at some newer schools in your surrounding districts and looked at the how they're designed, your vehicular circulation, your bus, your parent drop-off, the playgrounds, et cetera, they're much more space hungry than the buildings that were constructed back in the 50s and 60s and early 70s. A lot more requirements, safety requirements, SSIC, unfortunately, due to Sandy Hook. But with respect to Charles Wright, it's a very small site, beautiful school. I know neighborhood schools are very dear to the heart. But we took a test fit, of that. We took, and looked at that, and it really, from a site size, it doesn't really support a healthy layout for, a renovation. I think the state of Connecticut, and I always, they'll speak for themselves, and they may come do a site visit. I think they would probably challenge it of investing dollars there. Certainly, I've seen other things happen, but based upon the size of the parcel, it's very small, and it'd be hard to incorporate 21st century programming inside and also outside of the building there. No, great question.
Mr. Lesser?
Are we okay to ask Mr. Chairman questions of?
Yeah, should we let him finish the
Yeah,
presentation first?
that's what I want to ask.
Yeah, there's only a few more
Let's
slides.
finish the presentation, we'll go to the discussion.
So the 4C is the 211. Similar cost, slightly less, primarily because we're taking one building and bringing it up and due to escalation, and that's really that's what's contributing to the slightly lesser amount by about $3 million. Size of the building is the same. It's just we're basically changing how we're phasing it. So that estimated district share, which is really the number we're getting to, is just over $81 million in this scenario for that. So now it really comes down to what are the next steps here. We've looked at scenarios. The committee, ourselves, SLR, have looked at the different scenarios at a high level, looked at the test fits, and I think the recommendations are the 4A or the 4C option. The next step is really trying to determine that, and I think it's not only probably the Board of Ed, but also the town, and we said calculating those tax impacts and then rolling it into the overall debt service to the town, because it's more than just the schools. They got to look at the overall picture. But once that's selected, we'd ideally this summer do what we call due diligence, doing a little bit of a deeper dive. We'd want to perform what they call preliminary geotechnical borings. It's basically just trying to get an idea what's in the ground, make sure there's no budget busters, rock and unsuitable material down there, or high groundwater that may impact the design. What we call phase 1 environmental site assessment. That's a historical review of the site. Also looking at is there endangered species on the site that might prevent us from building in an area as well. Again, that's another thing that Pat's company does with us. But really just kind of doing our due diligence that are also requirements of what we call the grant application. We'd also do what we call the educational specifications, and that's really the programming of the building that'll educate not only the Board of Ed, but the state of Connecticut. What are the grades, what are the programs, what are the spaces that are going to be in there, then ultimately the architect, if it moves forward, what they need into the building. And that educates us on really fine-tuning the size of the building, if you will. And that's a requirement, again, for a grant application that hopefully would submit next June, about a year from now, actually, for that. And then based upon the ed specs and the due diligence, we'll refine these numbers and really dial in on one specific budget or budgets that hopefully would be proposed for a referendum at some point in the near future. And then most importantly, going to the state and start talking with the state and partnering with the state. It's really important that districts reach out to them early and share their thoughts so that they can give us their feedback. Again, the Charles right. Are they on board with that? Are they on board with building 2 new elementary schools versus renovating those schools? Because they're a big investor here as well. So they have to be on board and going together as a team, if you will, with the town and the state for that. So that's the immediate next steps for that. Up here, it's kind of hard to read. I do apologize because of the length of it, but this is kind of a schedule for the entire project, and whether it's 1 or 2 schools right off the start. But essentially, to the far left is 2021. We're showing some of those due diligence efforts, developing the cash flows, and ultimately passing the educational specifications, updating enrollment projection through Pat and his team. And then there's 2 different schedules we're going to show you. One was showing potentially a January referendum. The next one here is the only difference is an April referendum of 2022 for that, and submitting a grant application in June of 2022. When referendum is passed, that's when the project starts in earnest. That's when monies are now eligible for the project. Everything prior to that that's spent by the town is ineligible. After that point, you'd select an architect, start doing the design phase, and really getting rolling with the projects. These design durations, which are in red, are roughly 14 to 15 months. It can vary. That includes all the approvals required, planning and zoning, wetlands, going to the state of Connecticut because you need permission to go out to bid prior to doing so. The bidding phase, which is about 3 months, and really getting started in late 2023, early 2024, roughly about an 18-month construction process for both those projects at those sites, with hopefully an occupancy in fall of 2025 if all goes as planned. So they're both of these schedules are very similar, just the tweak and when the referendum date is. But we've done plenty of projects of this nature. You see, it's about from referendum, about a 3-year window to get to that occupancy. So with that, we'll pass it back to questions.
Mr. Lesser.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your report. Very, very helpful. Our schools are old and tired, and to get them into optimal learning for our students in the future, I think this is really important. But we have to, and this is a good start, have this conversation with the community and convince our residents that this is important for the best education for our kids. There's 2 areas I wanted to ask you about. One is, and the space challenges, one is about grade configuration, the second is about the reimbursement rates. So on the grade configuration, was there any consideration given, and this is also to the committee as well as to you folks, to changing the structure a little bit, or just looking at it, or was it looked at, from potentially like a we have K-6 obviously now, K-5, and then some of the middle school. We're one of the few districts in the area, as most of you know, that has a K-6 configuration, and I know you talked about the space issues that may be created, at least on an interim basis. Was there anything, consideration given in terms of looking at grade configuration? Then I want to just talk about reimbursement rates.
Sure, yeah, so back when we did our enrollment projection update in 2018, we did look at whether you had space at the middle school to move 6th grade up, and we determined you did not. So if you were to move 6th grade up, you would need to build an addition to the middle school, and I believe that site is already probably maxed out right now, so that ended up not being a feasible option.
Great, so you looked at that, thank you. In terms of the reimbursement rates, the 45 and 55% that is 2021 right now, maybe you can give us a little historical perspective. Do those change a little from year to year? So if we approve this, hopefully, or in sometime in the future in 2022 or down the road, is likely that those reimbursement rates are going to be different, and historically, do they move from year to year?
Yeah, but only a few percentage points. So back in 2018, those, we had just updated these literally in the last couple of days. They were previously about 47%, about 2 points higher. Just a couple of years ago, then it went down to 46, and now you're down about 45. We don't see them fluctuate too much, throughout the years. I think we saw one, there was about 3% in one town. But basically, whenever you pass your funding, that's when your percentage is locked in. It's the year that you pass your referendum or your funding authorization. That's locked in for the project. It doesn't change after that.
Got it, thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lusser. Any other questions? Mr. Healy?
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I got a couple that you may have mentioned I missed. When you were talking about hard costs, in these net district share or even in the other raw costs, how much of those numbers, typically percentage, is the hard cost, or is that a hard cost there, and we're not talking about fixtures as well?
Like in percentage of the overall project?
Yeah,
Yeah, the hard
roughly.
costs, they range typically between 75 to 80%. A lot of them lately have been like 78 to 80% has been hard costs, with the remaining balance be the soft costs, the FF&E, the fees and expenses.
And the
contingency.
reimbursement rate fluctuates against soft and hard costs, or is it all the same?
It's applied to eligible costs, so all your hard
eligible,
costs and soft costs
They can be.
are in the mix.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
And finally, you had that escalation of 3.5 compounded. Is that you feel it'll be 3.5 over the course of the project that you're building in, that could be a fluctuation of building materials and other things? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that's correct. And right now, that's a very sensitive subject.
No, I understand
Yeah.
that.
But yeah, basically account for,
I know it's
market
I know it's a
conditions
lot of
and-
guessing, a lot of guesswork given what we've seen
Yeah.
over the last just a few months with lumber and other
Sure.
commodities.
Yeah.
I think that was the only one. When we get into construction, are we required to have a project labor agreement?
No,
Okay,
no, state does not require that.
good. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, gentlemen. Yeah, and just for members of the public, obviously, we will continue the dialogue as we move forward. The next step for me, obviously, is to secure from the town the tax impact, again, moving forward. And I just want to say that this process is one that has been long. It has been a daunting task, but it is one that I think is one we have to absolutely do. And I definitely want to do our due diligence with this. We learned a lot with our high school renovation project, and for me, it's always been about health and safety of students. And, to be able to do this project efficiently, where I keep kids out of harm's way with regard to construction, is a win. And I think being able to provide a 21st century learning experience for all of our students is another win. So I'm certainly appreciative of your time and attention this evening, and we'll certainly have a lot more forthcoming.
Thank you, Mr. Annett. Moving on to the update and the reopening plan.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Are you going to keep up there?
Yeah, I'm going to go back up
So
there.
why do you put it down?
I don't know.
Okay,
Thank you.
so you can come back.
Mr. Sutton, I've got a presentation. Thank you.
It's getting out easy.
We've been so used to the Zoom meetings that we haven't typically had to put that down. Sorry about that, Jim.
Should we dim the lights a little?
Let me start off by saying this. This will absolutely, positively change. I will guarantee it. Currently, with regard to the ESSER 3 funding, the American Rescue Plan Act funding, the federal government requires all school districts to update their reopening plan. As you all know, we are currently open 5 days a week, and that is the intent of how we open in the fall. There are districts across the country that are still either on hybrid or are full remote, and that's what this legislation encompasses. So I do want to let you know again that this will absolutely, positively change. You might have heard or read in the Hartford Courant this morning the fact that other districts are also struggling with the fact that they want to plan for reopening, and lo and behold, we do not have guidance coming from the CDC or the State Department of Public Health. So we're in this quandary. So here's where we are right now. I want to make sure everybody's aware of where we're at. Right now, we currently are operating under an executive order from Governor Lamont with regard to mask wearing in schools. As you also know, we've got a robust summer school program starting up in a couple of weeks. And through July 20th, masks will continue to be required in school buildings. At recess or outside, they are not required, but in buildings they are. That executive order expires on July 20th. We are waiting for additional guidance from the CDC with regard to what that mitigation strategy will look like, along with all of the other mitigation strategies. So as we look back over this past year, you've seen on our dashboard, we had in our district 332 cases of COVID among students and staff. We've also seen, as our data tells us, that the impact of the vaccination has been profound. The last date that we had a staff member test positive in the Wethersfield Public Schools was the 26th of April, and that individual was scheduled to get their first dose of vaccination the following day. We have had no additional cases among staff. We've also seen a significant reduction in the number of cases among students as well. And our positivity rate in Wethersfield has dropped below the alert level. So we are awaiting additional guidance to see what we can do in terms of adjusting our mitigation strategies. Again, at the secondary level, with regard to middle and high school students, all of those students are eligible for the vaccine. And we've certainly seen a robust number of students at the secondary level, specifically at the high school, get the vaccine. So we think we're in a good position to be able to make changes to this document as we move through the summer. And again, this document was presented and developed by our co-liaisons for COVID-19. That would be our Chloe Bobrowski, who's our nursing supervisor, as well as our interim security director, Mike Barabal.
And Charles Brown, too?
Charles Brown as well.
I thought so.
Absolutely. Charles Brown was on the list today, and Charles has provided me with updated data in terms of the percentage of eligible Wethersfield residents that have gotten vaccinated. And I will say, with the exception of 12 to 15, they don't report that by town. We are in very good shape in this town with regard to age groups getting vaccinated. So, for example, off the top of my head, the 65 and older group, 91% of 65 and older in the town of Wethersfield have been vaccinated. And again, the numbers are robust. Now, what Charles tells us is that you get to the herd immunity, you start at that lower end of herd immunity at 70%. So we are well on our way, and that's why I think we will be able to ultimately make some changes. And again, will we have to wear masks? That's the big one. Masks are required at this point in time. Again, what we've done with our staff members who are vaccinated now, given the fact that there are no school activities currently going on, masks are not a requirement. But when our students are coming in for summer school, they will be a requirement. And again, masks are not required to be worn outside of school buildings. So at recess time, where students are socially distanced, they are able to take them off. I've been able to observe the Y program over at Hanmer, and I've seen just that over the course of the past week. Again, physical distancing, we're going right now to continue to maximize distance between students as feasible. and we are going to look to maintain cohorts to the best of our ability. We do believe also that the mitigation strategies that we had put into place this year had definitely led to no school spread. As I mentioned earlier in the year, we had one case where we felt it was related to school, and that was high school athletics. But at the elementary level, we did not see evidence that we had spread within schools. And that, to me, speaks volumes to the mitigation strategies and how they worked. Hand washing and respiratory etiquette, again, we're still going to maintain signage. We're going to continue to utilize frequent hand washing and the use of sanitizer. And again, covering coughs or sneezes. Those are all the basics. One of the other interesting pieces that you might have noticed over the past year, typically speaking, we get besieged by the flu. We reported no cases of flu this year among students. The other thing, and parents out in the audience, you would probably remember, we typically will deal with the norovirus, where we have the stomach bug going through schools. We did not have any of that happen over the course of this past year. So the mitigation strategies certainly seem to have worked. And again, what if you're vaccinated? I've gotten this question a lot. The district will not mandate that students or staff members be vaccinated. Certainly we encourage it based upon the data we've seen. And again, right now, the way the data and the way the guidelines state, we must wear masks within inside school buildings. So again, that is subject to change. Contact tracing and quarantines. At the beginning of the school year, we were told by the state that, the health district would do the contact tracing. There'd be members from the state that would do contact tracing. The moment we got our first case of COVID, the contact tracing fell upon us. It fell upon the nurses, it fell upon the principals, working with the parents, identifying who was on the bus, who was in close contact. So that will obviously continue. As you well know, you haven't gotten a communication from me. I sent out 132 communications this year to parents with regard to COVID or emergencies of snow closings. We have not had one in the past month. So we're moving in a very, very good direction. Again, the other thing we're going to be doing too, which we'll do immediately, is the quarantine period. We are going to reduce the quarantine period from 10 days down to 7 days with a test after 5 days. Right now, the tests are plentiful, very easy to come by, and we do not want to see our students have to quarantine any longer than they possibly have to. And again, this was a question that we had among superintendents to the Department of Public Health. We don't have to quarantine anymore for travel. We don't quarantine when we go out to a sporting event. We don't quarantine when we go to a restaurant. Why are we still quarantining at schools? And again, we've yet to receive a response. But that's one aspect that we really have to look at. Our data is telling us we're moving in the right direction. I also, let me just head back there. I also want to make sure that I let you know that vaccinated and fully immunized individuals will not have to quarantine. We experienced that this year with our staff. As you recall, we partnered with Hartford Healthcare and provided 2 opportunities for our staff members to get vaccinated. Once they met that 14 days beyond the second vaccination, they no longer had to quarantine. So that dramatically decreased the number of fail-to-fills, and it dramatically decreased the number of teachers that had to work from home. So. And again, screening or testing, performing a wellness screen prior to coming to school. There were some communications that I did have to send out. We had multiple cases where we had students that were pending test results that were sent to school. And we were adamant about making sure if your child is sick, they have symptoms, or they are pending test results because of exposure, please keep them home. That did result in a number of additional quarantines, and that's going to be something we continue to communicate. The staying home if you're sick piece is critically important.
Now, Michael, how many days is that? If you think, your child was exposed and may come down with it, so you have them home with you, how many days does that child have to stay home?
Typically speaking, the PCR test was about a 2-day turnaround. Okay. And now they've got rapid PCR tests, and they're readily available. And so you may recall.
They come back after that test.
Exactly.
Okay, so
yep.
if I brought them to CVS and they got a negative test, and by the end of the day, I could go to school the next
Absolutely.
day.
Yep.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And again, We are not, at this point in time, we're not doing any COVID testing on site. There are some districts that are exploring that with outside providers. We'll certainly explore that as we move through the summer and see how efficient it is. We have utilized our medical advisor to provide testing for some of our staff members to increase efficiency. But again, now that the tests are so widespread and so available, we think that it'll be easy for parents to be able to get tests for kids. And again, will there be any more vaccination clinics? As you know, we did the clinic for the staff. We did a closed clinic for our students aged 16 to 22 through Hartford Healthcare. By the time we got to 12 to 15, the vaccination was so readily available that Hartford Healthcare didn't even want to offer a closed clinic. It was just, come on in, we've got it, schedule an appointment. So the vaccine is plentiful right now, and as you can see by the data that we're getting from the Central Connecticut Health District, people are taking advantage of it. So I see us in a very strong position moving forward for next year at this point in time. So with that, that's the extent of where we're at right now. I will tell you that we have additional information to provide with regard to what lunch looks like, what cafeterias look like, what music schedules look like, and that's additional data that we'll be looking to get from the CDC and from the Department of Public Health. The Department of Public Health was running Tuesday health and safety meetings every single Tuesday. They have switched over to a schedule where they're going to start up again on July 13th. I would imagine that we would have information prior to that time that we can share with the community. And again, I'd also like to reiterate also for next year, the state no longer mandates the remote learning option. We want our kids in 5 days a week, full-time. That was an extraordinary challenge this year to try and balance that, where you had remote and you had in-person learning. We were down at the end of April to 96 students at the elementary level that were still remote. Principals have reached out to those families, and at this point, we are expecting all of those families back in the fall. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Any board members with questions?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Lou.
Yes, Mr. Michaels.
Can you, and this might have been a question for Chloe, but were there any medical issues in the district from students wearing masks in school?
We didn't see any, Lou. That's a great question, and we honestly didn't see any. One of the things we tried to build in during the course of our schedules were mask breaks, so the kids had the opportunity to, to get out, take the masks off. We did not see, like the flu, we did not see the typical, like the norovirus, where it rips through the entire school and you have 20% of your kids out. So we did not see that. I would also say our big concern last summer was, oh my goodness, they're not going to wear masks, the kids won't wear masks. The kids were amazingly resilient. And it was interesting, even when we lifted the requirement where, masks had to be on outside at recess, kids could take them off, observing out my office window at Hammer, they kept them on because they were used to it, and it was part of what they did. So we had excellent compliance with that. But we had not seen any illness, according to Chloe or any of our nurses, that related to the masks. Good question, though, Lou. Thank you.
And just, I guess, a follow-up to the mask question as well. Are we, as part of the thinking for next year, is part of the conversation looking at if the state drops sort of mask mandates inside our buildings, knowing that at the start of school, our younger students may still not fall into the vaccination population. Have we, did you like that?
That's a good run.
Are we talking about the experience for students who still want to wear masks, or parents that feel they want to wear masks, and I'll use bullying for lack of a better word, of those students who choose or still want to wear masks in school, even though they're no longer mandated to?
Yeah, we would never, if a student or a parent feels comfortable having their child wear a mask, we would certainly welcome that. From a bullying standpoint, I don't know of any cases of bullying related to masks over the course of this year. I think mask use became such a part of the fabric of what we did and how we behaved. I wouldn't think of it as being anything different. But that's something, obviously, we would need to take a look at from a social work perspective, from a social emotional health perspective. I mean, that's the other aspect with this when we talk about, where we're headed for the future and our ESSER II funding and how we're providing the additional support. This pandemic impacted us all, from the superintendent to board members, certainly to parents and certainly to students. And, we've lost a lot over the past year and a half. And, I think what's going to be critically important here is making sure that we bring families back in where they're at. So if it's someone that wants to wear a mask, or there's a mitigation, or mitigating strategies, there's other comorbidity, we would certainly welcome the students wearing masks. On the same token, I look at it from the perspective of, if I've got students that are fully vaccinated, then I'm questioning why I'm going to continue to mandate them wearing masks. One of the things that we talked today with Charles about, we had our graduation ceremony out at the Cove a week and a half ago. So, my wonder. My wonder is, well, have we seen an uptick? And we haven't. We haven't. So that's a great question. I appreciate you bringing it up. I think we really need to make sure that we're meeting families where they're at, we're meeting kids where they're at, we're making adjustments as need be.
Great, thank you.
I think it's a great point Lou made, and I think it's got to be on our radar for kids that are wearing masks because of parent choice or their choice, because the upper sixth graders might choose to. I know when I still go into a store like CVS or Target, I still put a mask on just because I don't know. So I think you made a great point. Let's keep a good eye out for that with the kids that desire to wear a mask. And I want to reiterate that this is not the board's decision to wear masks, or it's right still at the state level mandating us do that. So the people of Weathersfield need to know Michael will let us know as soon as the state changes the mandate. We can't do anything. We're locked into their rule.
Yeah, and
I don't
that's-
want people to think that he's doing the rule. It's, every town is getting that rule until it comes down from Mr. Lamont that it changes.
July 20th.
July 12th.
July 20th. That's our date.
Any other
Other
board
questions?
members with questions, comments? All right, thank you, Mr. Emmett.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lesser. Moving on to announcements and information, board members, check your packets. If there's a committee meeting you can't make, please let the committee chair know. Moving on to meetings held, Memorial Day Parade on 6/9/21, Mr. Cassio.
Yes, Chuck, the meeting was canceled because there was nothing to report. The parade took place, and we're going to be, again, getting together in September.
Excellent, thank you. The CREC Council on 6/16/21, Ms. Granado.
Okay, the CREC Council met on Wednesday, June 16th, and as I've said so many times, the CREC Council is the Capital Regional Educational Council, of which Weathersfield is a member, along with 35 other surrounding towns. And this council is responsible for the regional magnet schools and Project Choice. And they've also organized and worked this year on Hartford's Head Start program. The council voted on the consent agenda, which was the most informative of all the components of the CREC organization, most information on all the components of the CREC organization. There were descriptions and cost information on all the magnet schools, the CREC programs and services. I did request that next year we spend more time on these details and on the data from each of these schools and their services. This idea will be considered for next year's agenda. Finally, a vote was taken on how the meetings would be held next year. And as I told you, there's 35 towns involved, some way out from the Hartford area. So a hybrid meeting was chosen, which is a combination of in-person and a Zoom setup. So this meeting was our last until the 21-22 school year. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Granado. Any questions for Mrs. Granado? Okay, we'll move to our next committee, Facilities and Maintenance.
Thank you, Chris. The Facilities and Maintenance Committee met last night, and we had a complete update with Sally Katz from the town, indicating that this coming budget, the overtime budget was cut by $15,000 for custodial staff, and building non-cleaning supplies was cut by $12,500. That includes like vacuum cleaners, mops, stuff of that kind. So the CIP projects that were approved were some of the high crest roof replacement. Also, that was discussed that the portable classroom at Charles Wright School will be not getting a full renovation, but will be looking at the roof replacement. And one of the positive things, if you want to call it positive, is when the kids were not in school, the buildings were able to be painted. So many of our hallways and classrooms were painted in all our elementary schools. So the buildings were maintained and kept up to code. Filters are being changed, you know, when they're supposed to be. Work orders that were put in by teachers and staff are being completed. And one of the things that our buildings are being totally used. It's just not for school. They're after-school programs. We've got the Y programs. We have summer school in there. So we're really utilizing our buildings to the complete capacity. One of the things that's being experienced is hiring is very difficult. We have many openings in the maintenance area, but people are not applying for the jobs. So hopefully with this little announcement, there is you do have to pass a drug test and be fingerprinted, but like we were told last night, people will just go to Aldi and make the same amount of money per hour. So we just have to be very aware of that it's just not in the schools, it's everywhere. You know, people need to get out there and get their jobs again. There is a schedule for the summer for buildings to be cleaned, and that is being put together. One of the positive things also that came out last night, that the town council approved a $310,000 Hamner boiler for replacement, which is incredible. Thank you. One of the things that we're looking into with that is that we were trying to find out if we're eligible for a tax rebate. But we're working on looking at 3 different projects that we can group them together so it'll happen. The ventilation in the schools is working. We're looking at federal funding. So one of the things that was also brought up that people are wondering about air conditioning in the buildings. Some of the air conditionings are very low. I think I can just relate it to Hamner School. And what happens when the tar gets hot, that hot tar goes into the air conditioning filter and blows in hot air. So they're trying to find different ways of being able to circumvent that concern so that when we come down the road. So there's a lot being done. There's tree cutting at all our buildings. We're looking into fencing around Cantone Field to stop the traffic from running onto the field. So a lot of history. We have a story to tell. We're keeping our buildings and wondering why we're doing projects at buildings that we're thinking about renovating. You still have to do work. It's no different. You have to keep the buildings in order, and this is part of what we're looking at. We're putting good money into a facility that you need to do, and so that's why it's very important that we get into the infrastructure of our buildings and look at what need to be done. And then our presentation tonight was discussed. We had that review. We reviewed it last night, and here we are. And that's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. Moving on to Finance and Operations Committee meeting 6/22/21. That was tonight. Mr. Michaels.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few high-level overviews. Our current reforecast puts us at $825,509 under budget. We talked about the 2021 budget. We also, as you heard earlier, talked about the revised approval of the budget for the 21-22 operating budget, which we acted on this evening. We're wrapping up the school year. Things are closing up and moving along, and it's exciting to hear that Mr. Cassio is taking applications for employees of the town if you're looking for maintenance.
College kids will take them.
Anyone on a job?
Thank you.
Thank you. No meetings scheduled. There's no unfinished business. Public comment. Anyone from the public wishing to make comment, please come up, state your name and address, and you have 5 minutes.
Hey, everybody. Good evening. My name is John Koser. I'm a parent of students at Hanmer Elementary. I'm here on behalf of my family, but a few other families as well in town. And I'm just here to read a prepared statement, not so much to you, I guess, as to Governor Lamont, but if I may. My name is John Koser. My wife is Ilona. We're residents of Weathersfield. We have 2 children attending elementary school here in town. We are here to urge you to make masks optional for students for the following school year. We are no longer in a state of emergency, and children have a survivor rate of 99.9% against the virus. The CDC says extreme illnesses in children from COVID is very rare, and a vaccine is available to the majority of the population, including the staff at their schools. How long do the mandates have to go on? COVID will never be totally eliminated, so do these mask mandates plan to go on forever? It's time for children to go back to a normal school environment, not one built on fear. I ask you to follow the lead of 27 states that have already removed school mask mandates, along with Connecticut towns following suit, including Old Lyme, Wolcott, and Southington. How are those children different from the ones in our town? It's time to stop pointing fingers at who has the authority or responsibility and make masks optional for all students. The choice should be up to the parents and the child. Masks were originally mandated to flatten the curve. That was well over a year ago, and the curve has been flattened. Mask mandates are being lifted nationally and on a state level, but our children still have to suffer in schools. It's obvious it's no longer about safety. Masks are not for their safety when their teacher says they are skipping mask breaks because it's too hot or too cold outside to take one. Yet the classrooms were equally as hot recently during the 90-degree weather we were experiencing. Or we are not doing mask breaks because it's too disruptive from the school schedule. It's not about safety when the teacher asks them to eat a snack and lunch with their mask on, only pulling it down to take bits of food. It's not about safety when their allergies are so bad that they have trouble breathing and their chest hurts. And it's not about safety when their masks are soaking wet after gym or when they come home in pain because their heads ache from wearing masks for 6 hours straight. It's also not about safety when there are no guidelines given to schools or teachers about how many or how often mask breaks should be taken. I was told mask breaks are encouraged, that there are no minimum or maximum breaks required. It's up to the individual teacher to make that decision. This is unacceptable, especially when one of my children came home many days and said he got no mask breaks aside from when eating, and on those days they went outside for recess, but only in designated areas. Most children don't want to play by themselves outside during recess, so they are forced to wear masks while running and playing outside. All of the scenarios are alarming to us as parents. It's equally important for their social and emotional development to see the teachers' and parents' faces, and in our opinion, mask mandates border on abuse. Fear should not be taught over healthy living and common sense. Why are the mandates still in place? Is it because of relief money and grants made available to our town? We hope that's not the case. It is not what is best for our children. As of yesterday, there are only about 10 people hospitalized in our county for COVID, and a positivity rate of 0.4% in our state, so why are we still living like this? How much lower do the numbers need to go? You can take off your mask to sit at a restaurant, but not at your desk. Children are the least vulnerable, and yet they have the most restrictions placed on them. It's time for that to end. In addition, the mandate for individuals to wear a mask actually violates federal law. Title 21 U.S.C. 360 BBB, I'm not going to keep reading this, of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act states, individuals to whom the product is administered are informed of the option to accept or refuse administration of the product. All COVID-19 masks, whether surgical, N95, or other respirators, are authorized, not approved or licensed by the federal government. They are emergency use authorization only. And because they are EUA, only an individual has a right and option to accept or refuse administration of the product. EUA products are by definition experimental and thus require a right to refuse them. The FDA has stated that authorized face masks must be labeled accurately and may not be labeled in a way that misrepresents their intended use as source control to help prevent spread of SARS-CoV-2. They also state that the labeling may not state or imply that the product is intended for antimicrobial or antiviral protection or related uses, or is for use such as infection prevention or reduction. In conclusion, liability for forced participation in a medical experiment, masks in this case, including the possible injury, may be incalculable and therefore should be optional. I urge our superintendent and the Board of Education to respect and uphold the rights of individuals and parents to make masks a personal choice and remove mask mandates for the upcoming school year. And that goes to Governor Lamont as well. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you.
Can I ask you
Thank
a
you, John.
question?
Sure, go right ahead.
Elaine, point of order. We don't engage during public comment.
Okay. I just wanted to see if I heard it right.
No, sorry. You can hand that in as for record, though, right?
Yeah, that's okay. Okay. Hi.
Do you have your address on there, too? sir? Where do you live? Thank you, John.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
Can we have your address for the record?
Yeah, it's 284 Celestine Highway.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else from the public wishing to make comment? Seeing none, public comment is over. Board comment. Anyone from the board wishing to make comment? Ms. Granato.
Okay, I met with two groups that work a lot with the Weathersfield Public School, and one is our Hunger Action Team, which met on June 11th, 2021, and they met for strategic meeting planning on Friday, June 11th at Mill Woods. It was a great day for an outdoor and in-person meeting. The group was given the latest data on food insecurity in town. But what we were really working on was ideas for next year as a strategic plan. And these include utilizing the messengers that were part of the United Way grant, if possible, have schools involved through curriculum on health in the community, and a store for food and personal products in each school, possibly the nurse's office, drive-through food bank, a presentation on the numbers of our town residents who are finding food insecurity an issue in their lives, and that's to be presented to both the Board of Ed and the Town Council. HAT will meet again in September. And also, the Weathersfield Education Foundation will be meeting this Thursday, June 24th at 7 o'clock at the Weathersfield Country Club. The public is always invited to attend, and this group continues to find ways to enhance our Weathersfield school curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Granato. Any other board members wishing to make comment? Seeing none? Oh, do you have a comment? No. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Emmett, Mr. Kazaka, and Central Office for their hard work for this budget season. It went a lot longer than normal. But I also want to thank the Town Council. For the first time in many years, we're adding to our budget and not taking away, and I think it's great that we're getting our instructional supervisor and our supervisor for special ed. I think this is a great move and a great momentum builder for us as we come out of the pandemic. And it's also great to see that we will be able to use our ESSER funds as Mr. Emmett has identified to use them. So I think it's important that it's it's a great budget, and we have gotten what we needed to move forward. Do I have a motion to go into executive session? Mr. Healy?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and I'll move that we leave public session, enter an executive session at 8:25 or thereabouts for purposes of review, discussion of superintendent's evaluation, and that will include Mr. Emmett, Mr. Donahue, and Mr. Kazaka.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Lesser. All in favor, oh, what? No, Mr.
No, I
Lesser.
was about to second, but,
You can have, he can have it.
no.
It's all right, it's all right.
Any discussion, questions? No.
We-
All in favor,
we
say
did it.
aye.
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 Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone.